Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to a press event that we're having for purposes of my campaign for district attorney. And today I'm talking about monies that have been received from the district attorney, my opponent, that is either directly related to convicted felons or felons who have been indicted, or one particular person who is a former prosecutor in the district attorney's office, and I'll get into that in a minute. So I'm going to go through some of the documents, and all these documents will be available as well. And I'll go through these documents and the individuals as I'm explaining these. And just so I can make sure I introduce properly today, with me is Shirley Grindle. Most people know her as Orange County's watchdog in terms of campaign contributions, and she held that role for many, many years and was instrumental in helping the county form its ethics commission. And then we have Jerry Hunter, who's the retired assistant chief with the California Attorney General's office, assigned to the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. And I want to make clear, I'll make clear a couple of these two individuals first. So let me break down the first campaign contribution. The issue here today is that the district attorney has been taking money from convicted felons. And the first contribution he received was from Stuart Kaplan on June 30th of 2017. And Mr. Kaplan pled guilty, and we have his guilty plea form, we have the indictment. He pled guilty on September 28th, 2009 to tax evasion. So Mr. Kaplan was a convicted felon when he contributed the money to my opponent, Mr. Rackauckas, for his re-election for district attorney. And that amount of money was $1,500. Then there's a woman who was on the scene for a long time in Orange County politics, primarily centered in the city of Irvine politics. Her name is Frances Akavi. And Frances Akavi contributed to my opponent on November 5th of 2009. So that was while he was the district attorney, not yet in this election cycle. But she pled guilty to money laundering and other kinds of fraud on February 6th of 2018. And she did that in the state of Arizona. And we have that guilty plea as well, and the indictment and the information and her plea agreement. So these two items, Mr. Rackauckas, my campaign, and myself as an individual, we sent out a release and we asked him and brought this to his attention to return this money. His campaign consultant, Dave Gilliard, acknowledged that the district attorney received contributions from Stuart Kaplan and Frances Akavi, but he dismissed our call to return those campaign contributions. And instead he said something to the effect, well, everybody, Todd Stewart Kaplan and Frances Akavi contribute to a lot of people. We're no different, so we're going to keep the money. So we know for sure that the district attorney's consultant acknowledged the contributions. They acknowledged the fact that we thought it was inappropriate for them to take the money and to keep the money, and instead they decided to keep the money. The next campaign contribution was in February 14 from Sam and Susanna Salakian. And they appear to be husband and wife affiliated with a company called Global Holdings. They also contributed again on June 19th, 2017, both husband and wife, for $2,000. They had a fundraiser for Mr. Rackauckas on October 22nd, 2017, at the home of a doctor who was affiliated with the Salakian company over in Orange Park Acres. And so there's a copy, and we'll provide that to you, of the fundraiser invitation that was sent out by the district attorney, Tony Rackauckas' campaign. We're also going to show today an indictment that was unsealed on September 27th by the federal government. And in this case, Mr. Salakian has now been charged by the federal government with fraud involving up to $248 million in workers' compensation fraud. And it's often called capping. It's where people are paid money to refer business to him, medical services, to his companies that is not necessary. And that came to our attention, that indictment was unsealed in the workers' compensation periodical on October 4th. So in these particular cases, in Todd Kaplan, he was a convicted felon. Todd Kaplan was a convicted felon at the time Mr. Rackauckas took the money. With respect to Frances Akavi, she was convicted, but he took the money before she was convicted, and yet he refuses to return it, and he's been alerted to that, and his campaign has already said they're going to keep the money. Mr. Salakian contributed the money on 2 different occasions, almost $8,000, he and his wife, but he was recently indicted. And that's why today we're asking the Rackauckas campaign to give back that money. But the most important one, the one I think is the most disturbing, is the one involving Brian Kazarian. So Brian Kazarian donated $1,000 on September 4th of 2018. Brian Kazarian in 1999 was caught as a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, leaking information to the Hells Angels with respect to a conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. The district attorney was the district attorney at the time that Mr. Kazarian leaked information to the Hells Angels about the conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. I started in the DA's office about the same time as Mr. Kazarian. The way Mr. Kazarian got set up was they came up with a phony search warrant, and they named an informant by name in the search warrant, and Mr. Kazarian gave a copy of that search warrant to a member that was also involved in the conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, and that's how he was caught. So Mr. Kazarian was convicted of conspiracy. He went to prison, and he was disbarred from the California State Bar. He has now been reinstated as an attorney, and he's practicing law in Orange County. But the fact that Mr. Kazarian, as a convicted felon who cheated the district attorney's office and absolutely betrayed law enforcement, is incomprehensible. So at this time, I'll call on Shirley Grindle with respect to her comments about the case.
Well, you've heard the background. You know, this really is a test of the character of the current DA. The money involved is not that much. It's not millions of dollars, but this is a real test. What kind of character do we have in the DA's office? If he returns these contributions, he would remove suspicion by all of us and the general public that he condones the criminal behavior of these contributors. Not returning those contributions reflects badly, not only on Tony himself, but it raises public suspicion as to the lack of integrity in our criminal justice system. In the interest of all concerned, including Tony Rackauckas, I would urge him to do the honorable thing and return these tainted contributions immediately and stop taking future contributions from shady characters. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Shirley. At this time, I'd like Jerry Hunter, who I introduced as he's a retired assistant chief with the California Attorney General's office. Jerry.
Thanks, Todd. Good afternoon. As Todd said, my name is Jerry Hunter. After 36 years in law enforcement, 36 years being a cop, I retired as the assistant chief for the California Attorney General's office, Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. I've dedicated my entire professional career to protecting the public. And I have to tell you today that I am absolutely shocked that Tony Rackauckas has taken thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from convicted felons and indicted felons. Apparently one of these is, as Mr. Spitzer has talked about, Sam Salakian is indicted over $248 million. The federal government indicted him for $248 million worker compensation fraud. And at the same time, he gave $3,900 in contributions and hosted a Rackauckas fundraiser in October of 2017. This is just plain and simple. This is corrupt, and this is unethical. You know, law enforcement officers, they risk their lives every day to protect our communities. The district attorney, he is the top law enforcement officer for the county of Orange. And as you've seen that Mr. Spitzer has outlined, a whole pattern of unethical and corrupt interactions with indicted felons and criminals. The Tony Rackauckas should return the money, or at the very minimum, give the money to charity. But accepting money from convicted felons and indicted felons is just unreal to me. So I would call on Tony Rackauckas to just do the right thing, okay? Pay to play is a dangerous game to get into, and it's just plain outright illegal. And it's time to stop it in the county of Orange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. The one other thing I want to point out is the district attorney has jurisdiction to investigate workers' compensation fraud. And Mr. Salakian has a history of throwing money around to all kinds of elected officials for many, many years. So if there's any questions, Mr. Zarita, did you have a question?
No, I'm fine.
You're good? Okay.